I get hundreds of DMs from people saying, JJ, what's your target this cycle? And I'm like, miss or sir or them or whatever the case is, you need to understand something. You will not make money unless you're patient and you hold for multiple years at a minimum. And, there's some people who are like, JJ's crazy. Of course you can make money. You just do some smart things. And I'm talking about real, durable, differentiated returns in terms of creating trillions of dollars in value over the last decade. They are Bitcoin and NVIDIA. And it is very interesting to me that NVIDIA's identity early on in terms of catching fire with GPU sales and going crazy was, at least in one period, due to selling large amounts of GPUs for people to use as compute for hash rate production on the Bitcoin blockchain, which is pretty crazy. And so I think that it's kind of ironic. The next quantum opportunity for NVIDIA is to basically heavily invest in a different kind of hash rate, which is the production of decentralized intelligence. My definition of intelligence is the creation of new testable hypotheses. So you can kind of come up with more ideas that are testable, measurable, and that could affect some positive change in the world. When you're representing value of an object or an asset or something that you have property ownership over, at least on a temporally sort of finite basis, you can then sort of shift the representation of value record keeping from seashells to dollars to gold pieces to whatever, in a more abstract way. The more open source there is in the world, the more abundance there is. The more abundance there is, the more freedom there is. And the more freedom there is, the more amplification of our, uniqueness and energy in the universe. And I think that's the right way to go. There's a lot of things that are not getting done in the world because we only have an intrinsic incentive in place to do them. But imagine the things in the world that we could have if there were increasingly shifting and sort of dynamic, extrinsic, meaning a measurable currency, incentives for all of the great things that humans could be doing. That is worth quadrillions of dollars. People do not understand how big this is. That will be very, very big if it properly succeeds. It is worth at least an order of magnitude more than current world GDP. People do not understand the magnitude of this.
Welcome to the Ventura Labs podcast. Today, we're joined by Joseph Jacks, the founder of OSS Capital, the first and only venture capital firm focused exclusively on open source software. With a deep understanding of the open source ecosystem and a passion for innovation, Joseph has a unique perspective on the trajectory of artificial intelligence. He's not afraid to challenge conventional wisdom, and in our conversation, we will explore the significance of open source, the balance between individual and collective interests, and the ways in which technology is reshaping our world. And now, to Joseph with the 14th Ventura Labs podcast.
All right. Well, it is rolling.
Let's go.
JJ.
Let's go.
We're in San Francisco.
Thanks for having me, man.
Great to meet you.
Likewise.
Beautiful city.
It's a gorgeous city.
Been exploring. I went to the bridge this morning.
Nice.
Walked all the way basically back from the bridge to this area.
Nice.
So,
You missed the parallel universe where 5 million people were killed by a tsunami in San Francisco yesterday.
oh yeah, the earthquake.
Yeah. Well, it didn't happen, but in a parallel universe, all of San Francisco is underwater by about 100 feet. And there's carnage. It's a scary time. Scary time.
You believe in the multiple realities?
100%.
Really?
Absolutely.
Okay. And you're not religious at all?
I was raised Baptist Christian,
Okay.
very conservative Baptist Christian. And my dad was an elementary school teacher for like 30 years and also a theologian. And he was a deacon at the Evangelical Baptist Christian Church that we were raised in, basically. And the only white family, all black, Evangelical Baptist Christian
Really?
Church. Yeah, so we were raised just like in a very diverse kind of
In San
setting.
Francisco.
Southern California.
Okay.
Southern
Okay.
California. So I was born in Long Beach, and then I'm the youngest of 5. So we were basically, pretty big family,
Yeah.
mid-sized family.
Well, I came to know you because of BitTensor. That's how we're here today.
Nice.
That's in other parallel universes.
Yes.
Maybe we're here for a different reason. But what is that?
This is a leisure. It's a hydration drink that has 10 vitamins and nutrients, and it's all over like Meta's offices and kind of taking off. It's pretty delicious.
Meta. Facebook. This is
Yeah, a lot of tech companies are starting to move off of, Prime and Gatorade and Liquid Death, and this is kind of an interesting. It's a really nice flavor profile. They have a bunch of they've got like raspberry and watermelon and
like hydration, water,
hydration,
Gatorade, sports,
hydration, just leisure time.
leisure time.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's hydrating. It's delicious, and it's got vitamins. And it's
Okay.
got adaptogens.
So it's like a water upgrade
Yeah, think of it as like a water replacement almost
for elite athletes.
for anyone really. I mean, you could be on a health kick, or you could just be having your leisure time, getting hydration.
There you go. Does it have stevia though?
I think they're working on the stevia, but yeah, no, it's good. No fake stuff. It's pretty cool.
That's perfect.
Anyways, BitTensor. We
Yeah.
learned about each other through BitTensor.
Absolutely.
Well, I have a question before you even start grilling
Okay.
me.
Before
Why did you start this podcast?
Wow. Okay. This is okay. That's all right. So the long story short for why I started the podcast was I believe BitTensor is basically gonna flip Bitcoin. Like I have that level of conviction. I'm 24 years old,
Wow.
and I thought, how can I gain exposure to this trade or investment without just buying more BitTensor? How can I do that? So it's a play to just gain exposure to BitTensor. It's to increase my leverage to BitTensor. So it's like I'm dedicating like my career basically to working on BitTensor, building a brand in BitTensor.
Man, Grant, this is super impressive. How the hell did you develop this level of conviction at 24 years old in BitTensor, this super technical, very complex, bleeding edge technology? How did that happen? Explain, sir.
I will have to say it's I would have to attribute it to luck.
Attributed to
Right.
luck. Okay.
You have to. So I graduated University of Texas at Austin a year ago.
Okay.
Last December, I graduated.
Okay.
Had an economics degree, bachelor's of science. And I was like, I'm not going to get a job, right? I was an options trader, like
Okay.
Wall Street, prop trader. I was like, I could potentially see myself doing that type of thing if I get a job one day.
Okay.
And then, so I'm sitting at home and I'm just trying to figure out how to make money, right? With just the goal of making money.
Yeah.
That's it. And I started out like that's when I started in crypto, and I entered crypto through the super degen side,
Okay.
like NFT, meme coin. And my thesis was,
This is like 3 years ago.
no, this is last December.
Oh wow, very recently.
Yeah, I was not in crypto at all. I was like traditional finance.
So interesting. So
Yeah.
you actually have all of these views from zero 1 year ago.
Yeah.
That is extremely impressive.
Yeah, I have no AI background, no machine learning.
So you were doing
background.
prop trading where?
I wasn't like personal trading.
You just had your
Since I
own.
was
you had-
18, yeah.
you've developed your own book for the last 6 years in the stock market.
Yeah.
You're 24.
Yeah.
Can I ask what your don't tell me about your capital and your positions. What has your IRR been since you were 18 trading stocks?
Well, performance wise,
Yes.
right? I'm 18.
Net overall across all the trades.
Okay.
IRR since you were 18.
I started with $5,000 saving up from working at Subway, right, in high school. And I go to college, and I don't know anything about the stock market, right? But my dad was always like, if you want to make money, you got to work with money. So the stock market's the place to be. So I get into options trading my freshman year during the COVID crash, and I made a lot of money shorting the market, but I continued to short the bottom. So I ran up my account, and then I ran it right back down. And so that's phase one, boom and bust. And then a few years later, accumulate more capital, and then actually, I probably shouldn't be getting into this. This isn't even answering your question.
No, that's okay. What I was thinking of is like, if you were to look at the first $5,000,
Yeah.
what did that turn into over 5+ years of trading?
Okay. Percent wise, I mean, well over 1,000%.
Nice. More than a 10x.
Yeah.
More than a 10x.
But my risk tolerance is much higher than
Right. Right.
the average person because I'm so young.
Sure.
I'm not afraid to go to zero.
Sure. Well, I think what you learned probably building up and then getting pulled down, you probably learned a lot of valuable lessons. A lot of people don't learn those lessons early on in their investing careers. I feel like we experienced it a little bit, but not really. And it's kind of been mostly very consistently up for myself, about a similar time frame as you being an investor. I didn't have any, angel investing or stock trading, in your case, or venture capital, like working at a VC fund like Sequoia or something, experience. I had zero, experience. I had built a couple of startups and, I'd worked at a lot of technology companies. And I know how to sell like complex technology, but investing capital, investing money is different. It's a different skill. So I feel like I still need some moments of humility to really learn the craft and the skill of what I'm doing. Maybe they're coming. I haven't really experienced them yet, but in some small ways, yes. But like, I mean, I hope it doesn't happen. Don't get me wrong. But I think if you look at something like BitTensor, there's a lot of short-term thinking. There's a lot of people that are sort of like, I get hundreds of DMs from people saying, JJ, what's your target this cycle? And I'm like, miss or sir or them or whatever the case is, you need to understand something. You will not make money unless you're patient and you hold for multiple years at a minimum. And, there's some people who are like, JJ's crazy. Of course you can make money. You just like, do some smart things. And I'm talking about real, durable, differentiated returns where what you did as an 18, 19-year-old, 10x, most people don't reach that. They get to a 2x or 3x or 4x, and they don't actually reach meaningful returns because they don't have patience. And they also don't understand that if you can be tolerant of volatility over, longer periods than other people for quality assets, you will outperform everyone. And so this is kind of, what I hope to honor with BitTensor is like all of OSS Capital's investments are in private equity based startups where we're buying equity. And those are very binary kind of outcomes, like either goes to zero, which it has and does fully, or you recover some of the money, or maybe you just recover 1x, like you get the money back. But in very few cases do you return either something meaningful or nothing really. Like it's either really, really huge or mediocre. Like it's the middle ground of that is like not super, super common. I mean, it's really either you're barely getting your money back or some couple multiples, or it's death, or it's huge, really huge. And in statistics, they call this the power law distribution or the Pareto distribution, and it's like a big hockey stick, it's like a really sharp angled hockey stick.
Yeah.
Right. Where like on one dimension, it's starting at 0 and then you go up a hill, but it's like shit. And then it's like vertical.
Yeah.
But there's like a thin area where it just goes vertical. And what that law is saying is that 90%, 80 to 90% of the output, comes from the top 1 to 5%. Like it's crazy. Like the top 1 to 5%. And then in the top 1%, that's like the majority, like the vast majority. So it's like really, really extreme concentration. And of the two assets that have done that in terms of creating trillions of dollars in value over the last decade, they are Bitcoin and NVIDIA. And it is very interesting to me that NVIDIA's identity early on in terms of catching fire with GPU sales and going crazy was, at least in one period, due to selling large amounts of GPUs for people to use as compute for hash rate production on the Bitcoin blockchain, which is pretty crazy. And so I think that it's kind of ironic. The next quantum opportunity for NVIDIA is to basically heavily invest in a different kind of hash rate, which is the production of decentralized intelligence. And Jensen actually made some comments on this level at an event, I think with, the great Brad Gerstner of OSS Capital. And Brad asked Jensen, do we need to continue to see the absolutely gargantuan appetite of the hyperscalers for compute, like Microsoft and OpenAI and Anthropic, in order for this NVIDIA stock price to keep going up? Or are there other things that could happen that could continue to unlock enormous amounts of growth? And Jensen immediately said, I am very optimistic about distributed training, decentralized architectures, and so on. So I think that people have not yet connected the dots that the success of decentralized AI will produce value creation events that are perhaps orders of magnitude bigger than what we've seen with centralized AI companies like OpenAI and Anthropic and frankly Meta. I'll actually put Meta out there. Even though they're great purveyors of the leisure hydration drinks, which is really smart of them to do, I would say, Zuck's philosophy, I identify so highly with. I really admire his courage and his dedication to open, transparent technology contribution. What I find disingenuous about what Zuck is doing with Llama is it's not really open source. It is Fopen source, FAUX. And when you need to do a license deal with Zuck, if you're Amazon or Microsoft, that is not open source, right? And this is a principles thing. I think it's like open source washing when you go to DC and you market your company and your brand as we are open source. It's not. It's a type of freemium proprietary technology, even though Llama has actually been extremely useful and valuable for the world. And I'm a big fan of the technology for sure. And it's like super valuable. I think that you have to call it something else. So we actually proposed a term that is like not super controversial. I think it kind of meets people in the middle, which is open weights. And if you call those models that are built in the way that Llama is built, open source, it's not really like fully honest about the dynamics at play. And so I think BitTensor hopefully like allows people to see how open you really need to be in order to kind of make those sorts of guarantees for the industry and for developers, because you have mechanistic enforcement of the way you actually organize compute and training data and kind of pipelines, as well as the inferencing and the fine tuning pieces of it, like the whole pipeline of tasks that produce intelligence. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, BitTensor is entirely open source, I'd say, for the most part. You could make some arguments that it's not completely open source in some aspects, but I guess to step back, what is your investment thesis in BitTensor, your overarching investment thesis? What is that?
To maximize freedom and minimize enslavement. If you can get those things right, and you can create tools and infrastructure that maximize the normalization in society on those two dimensions, maximize freedom and minimize enslavement, I think that the side effect of that would be making a lot of money and producing a lot of wealth creation for myself and my investors, as well as the people who actually help build those things. So there's like multiple stakeholders. There's like, the people who come up with the capital, people who make the investment, and then the people who actually build the technology and the companies and the products and the protocols. And then what you have with cryptocurrency is that you have this ability for anyone to participate. People like that are really young and curious and awesome, just coming up in their lives in general. Like, you're so young. I'm a decade older than you. I feel like a grandma. I mean, I've lived and I've like done so many things that I really admire your curiosity. When I was your age, I was lost. And now I am found. But I mean, like, when I was your age, I was not clear about like the things I really had deep passion and obsession. And I have to say, probably everyone that I work with, I think like Matt Mullenweg comes to mind. So the WordPress, the co-founder of WordPress. And I think he created the project when he was 20. So he was 4 years younger than you. So that's just like really, to me, very awesome to see when people find something that draws them in and is really like, I think I saw something on the internet. Sometimes the ideas choose you. It's not always that you choose the idea. I think it's really, really awesome to see in very young people, because if you stick with it, then you really, really kind of like dedicate energy and time to that thing that will likely grow into something that's like really important for humans. You will be able to accomplish anything you can imagine in your life in a really positive way. So that's really, really cool to see.
Well, I appreciate that. You said BitTensor produces decentralized intelligence. How would you define intelligence in those terms?
That's a good question. I think the word intelligence is subjective and means a lot of things to a lot of, just different people for different reasons. I think my definition of intelligence is the creation of new testable hypotheses. So you can kind of come up with more ideas that are like testable, measurable, and that could affect some positive change in the world. I think that that's the definition of intelligence for me. Whether you do that synthetically with compressing information and producing neural networks and weights that encode very interesting probabilistic representations of information, I think that's great. That's intelligence. I think humans are going to keep inventing different representations of intelligence over time, and so I think BitTensor very uniquely and sort of almost maybe at least directionally perfectly, if not perfectly, allows for a very abstract definition of intelligence that you can then actually measure and incentivize. And I think that's done in a decentralized manner. You have all these computers around the world doing the record keeping of, the operations that humans are kind of incentivized to go and do. And I think that's really profound, actually. Bitcoin is really a record keeping system. Most people don't understand that Bitcoin is not this on-chain money thing, right? It's like the whole on-chain word has been so confusing for people because when you first learn about cryptocurrencies and blockchain, right? So many new ideas, new concepts, and it's very overwhelming for people. But if you really just take for a moment and slow down and understand a few things carefully, blockchain means something specific. The idea of decentralization also means something specific. The idea of on-chain means something specific. And a lot of these notions are sort of like, they're interleaved and conflated in a way that confuse people. So Bitcoin is a record-keeping system for producing a new representation of what we call currency as humans. When you're representing value of an object or an asset or something that you have property ownership over, at least on a temporally sort of finite basis, you can then sort of shift the representation of value record keeping from seashells to dollars to gold pieces to whatever in a more abstract way. And the beautiful thing about what Satoshi Nakamoto devised around these like ideas of a distributed ledger combined with cryptographic guarantees of the signatures and like what you'd actually write on that ledger, and then also the consensus and the way in which you prove that that's untamperable through like high entropy, basically hashing, which is like very so far really provably smart of a design. And we're gonna continue to see evolutions of the representation of money. I think for the same reason, we're going to continue to see evolutions of the representation of intelligence. And BitTensor allows for that emergence, right? So there's a here and now sort of like rough consensus definition of intelligence. Like, if you ask 100 people this question, and it's a deep question, you'll probably get, close to 100 different answers, but everyone's sort of saying the same thing in different ways.
Yeah.
Like if you sort of simplify it, there's patterns in that.
Well, the meanings of words shift over
The
time.
meanings of words shift, the way people communicate shifts, the way they're comfortable communicating shifts. We invent new words. We invent new words all the time. Right. I've invented some acronyms that describe combinations of words to describe things that are interesting and unique and sort of differentiable that didn't yet have language to describe them, and that's like a useful, important, necessary thing to sort of expand the vocabulary of what we can actually explain. I think David Deutsch has a great framework for this, which is what can be explained is the sort of predicate for knowledge creation, like better explanations, more explanations for things. How can you really explain something? How does it work? Why does it work that way? What causes it to behave that way? Those are explanations. And the more explanations you have, the more knowledge creation you have. And the more knowledge creation, the better we're able to cure diseases and solve problems and create new technology and in general amplify the success of our species, basically. The moment we start doing that in a less pronounced way than we had in the past is the moment we're going to start dying and go extinct as a species. That's not going to be fun. I want to make sure we're around for a long time, So that's, to me, I think BitTensor is really powerful in that way because it's it allows for the sort of the evolution of how you actually define intelligence to be codified in the system. And that is really, really powerful. For now and these days, training neural networks and scaling them out and making them, smarter and have longer memory and, be able to manipulate APIs and now computers pretty soon and these other things, like, that's pretty table stakes. I think it's going to look very different in maybe 5 years. Maybe 5 years, man. I mean, it's like it could change fundamentally in 5 years. I am 100% confident it changes fundamentally within a decade. Within a decade. Like the representation of this stuff changes fundamentally. It will look totally different than it looks now. 100%. That I am 100% certain of. What I'm not certain of, even in the least, is what that's going to look like. I have no idea.
That is a common thread people have said is they know it will be different, they don't know how.
Yes. I feel the same. I feel the same.
How? Because you're famous, well, I say famous. Your fund is famous for open source
Yes.
investing.
Yes.
How is building on BitTensor different compared to traditional open source companies?
It's hard. It's messy. It's going to get a lot better. I would say compared to traditional open source companies, the world is better kind of educated about how to sort of contribute to, monetize, and use open source packages and open source technologies in general, at least in the world of software. So we have open source programming languages. We have open source, databases. We have open source applications now, which is another like huge growth area. Shout out to companies like Plane and NoHoDB and Hopscotch and, Cal.com. A lot of examples of open source applications that are really interesting. And you can then sort of like get a significant amount of adoption because people understand those technologies. When you talk about BitTensor in the context of usability and how companies really kind of have access to it, I think it's important to understand a few things. One is BitTensor does not have a UI or a front end of any kind. It's actually a damn complicated system and it needs to be simplified a lot more. So a big part of that is like really explaining to people how this thing works, which I'm happy to do, and we can go for it and do it, right now if you want. But in general, I would say the big difference between an open source company and how people kind of think about like, how do I use BitTensor? How is it actually like producing useful things in the world? These types of questions. There's a lot to explain.
Yeah, BitTensor has a lot of moving parts.
A lot of moving parts.
And it's a foreign concept.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's that like blue ocean, essentially.
Yeah, that's fair.
You have a very technical background.
Actually, I don't. Zero technical background.
I would debate that. I started a Kubernetes company.
Well, I was on the more non-technical part of that company.
Okay.
So, like I'm good at explaining technical things to people and sounding like I understand them. No, I'm just kidding. I do understand it. I'm just not an engineer by training. So, I'm deeply intellectually curious about stuff. So I need to understand how it works. And, I need to really understand like the design, how to deploy and run it and what the interfaces are, where the architecture is, blah, blah, blah. And, I'll read code and stuff like that, but I'm not going to be like writing code or, contributing PRs to projects. And I've never really built an application myself. I'm not like a software engineer, but my older brother, Jeremiah, is a software engineer. And he was, actually one of the early white hat, thanks evangelical Baptist Christian reading the Bible, first thing in the morning kind of, dynamics. And, he, inspired me to learn about how computers really work at like a technical level. And, we had O'Reilly, programming books with all the different animals on them and stuff, and Perl, Java, C++. And, I would read some of those books and, maybe I understood what I was reading, maybe I didn't, but, I was like 7 or 8 or something when I first really interacted with that stuff fairly seriously. But I'm not really like a programmer or engineer. I'm a wannabe engineer. I mean, and I think I can come up with good ideas for people, but the thing that I feel very strongly about is when you come across a really interesting technology and you understand how it works, you can contribute more to society than if you're just a user. If you're just a user of the technology. So yeah, but I don't really have a technical background.
Well, you have an extremely robust conceptual understanding, at least of these very technical concepts.
I mean, you do too, sir. Otherwise, you wouldn't have started a podcast at the ripe old age of 24. Interviewing people.
I appreciate that. What sparked your interest in open source? When was that moment for you where it's like open source?
Yeah, like a lot of people ask me that question. I think like going back to the interactions with computers, like with my brother and watching him just stay up super late coding on stuff. And I think when you start to learn about how computers work, you quickly learn about open source and free software and like these ideas of like, oh, you can like see the code and really understand it and like reproduce things and change the behavior of the system and like really actually be part of the kind of the sausage making, process of like actually making technology. And I think that that's really a formative introduction that almost everybody has. So I would say I first learned about open source, to answer your question, probably almost 30 years ago, but like 20 plus years ago, 25 years ago, maybe something like that. And I didn't have a forensic understanding of open source. Only up until I would say probably 15 years ago, I really started to understand it more. Because I was working at a French open source data integration company called Talent, and they were one of the early open source companies. It was like Red Hat, JBoss, MySQL, and then Talent. Talent was like in the top 5, top 10 maybe, but probably upper in the top 5 open source like success case studies. And they were started in, I think 2005 is when they started the company. I joined them in 2010. And if you worked there like as an employee, like there was like this handbook. There was like a onboarding, like employee onboarding thing. And it was like a whole handbook. It was like 200 pages or something. Like you just have to study it. You have to read it over the weekend, and like they'd be like, okay, you have 3 weeks of on-ramping. You like really get like inculcated. Like study. They give you tests and stuff. It wasn't like a cult, but it was like you had to like learn the playbook. And I don't know, like 10, 20% of the playbook, I'm talking about a couple hundred pages, right? That was all about open source. And it was all about like how open source worked and how do you think about it in terms of the technology development process and the way you explain it to the company that you're selling to, like why that's important, why that's useful, and all of this. And one thing that I found really sad over the last 15 years, just as an observer, is that when you get private equity companies involved that really just want to squeeze the lemon and extract all the value, they delete and remove and deprioritize and maybe kill completely all of those ideas of investing in open source, using it to like add more value, create more, useful technology for the world and improve the technology, innovation process and speed it up, and all that stuff. Like, I think it's unfortunate. And that actually happened with Talent is, Silver Lake and, a bunch of big VCs and then another big private equity, player. They went public. They had a good IPO. They had the whole open source commercial dynamic. And then when really the big private equity players got involved, Thoma Bravo took them private. They just really killed it all. And I think that hurt the impact and the scale potential of the company's, real impact and potential it could have in the tech industry. And so I kind of had a weird circuitous path to starting OSS Capital. And when I started it, I wanted to preserve the principles of open source and really like deeply like integrate them into the way we do, into our investment thesis, into how we think about generating great returns and all that, really great returns. I just never wanted to be like, oh, we'll do 5x, 10x the fund or something. I was like, we're going to shoot for 100x and we're going to accept nothing less than 50x kind of thing, like for each fund. And then like what that means is there have to be many investments in each fund that are like 1,000x, 5,000x something, right? Like not many, but like at least one or two in each fund. And then like plenty of them that could be like 200x, 500x kind of thing. And a lot of losses, but each portfolio has to have like, but we wouldn't sacrifice. So that's all like basic stuff. We would not sacrifice honoring the principles of open source. And we would not like turn to the dark side and be like, rug pull the community or change the license or do these like straight up evil things in my opinion. So, I have been very fortunate to work with a lot of these incredible open source founders from the last generations. Bob Young from Red Hat, he's the co-founder of Red Hat, incredibly wise man, and very active and just high energy, depths of wisdom. Matt Mullenweg, when he was 4 years younger than you now, created WordPress, and like birthed that system that is now like half the internet is WordPress. He built a really awesome company that's massively successful and has done really incredible things for the world. Founder of GitHub, who actually worked at Automatic before creating GitHub. So Tom Prestonwerder is amazing. And I, both founders of YouTube, which I think that they're actually not open source, but Chad and Steve had a philosophy that is like deeply, deeply respectful of how do you maximize value creation in the world? How do you maximize it? We are not paying attention to value capture. We want to focus on how do we maximize value creation. If you really have a hugely successful run at doing value creation, you do not even need to work like insanely hard and do all these crazy gymnastics to create tens of billions of dollars in value, for yourself and for your investors and for the company, right? For the startup. And YouTube's probably $1 trillion company. If it were separate from Alphabet. If it was standalone. So I think that I hope to honor those ideals of open source because they're really very often forgotten once a company succeeds and reaches hundreds of millions in revenue or billions in revenue. And I'm excited and very optimistic that we're going to have many companies that reach hundreds of millions in revenue, and we're not going to betray those ideals and those principles, really. So it's just so interesting because I don't think there's like perfect solutions, and I think that there's a lot to learn and navigate on the way of like sort of figuring this out. So to me, BitTensor is like one of these really interesting technologies that I think can maybe shine a light on some interesting experiments we can run.
How do you answer that question of maximizing value creation? What's the answer to that?
You have to embrace open source. It's the same stuff we've been talking about. The way you maximize value creation is you have to embrace open source. When you create content freely accessible for people, that's kind of a form of open source. It's like open content creation. You know, if you don't paywall the interviews you've been doing, and you continue to have, more success in your viewership and everything, like that's a form of open kind of contribution. It's not open source really in a technical sense, but I think that's a form of it. I think, you really have to sort of imagine what are the biggest problems facing society and facing humans. And you have to like boil those down in very measurable and definable terms. And then the moment in which you've really measured and boiled those things down in a way that you can really communicate clearly, you then have to sort of imagine how would that dynamic be fixable or changed or massively improved if we applied open source like on it in some particular kind of way. Like it could be like wrapped around the whole thing, or you could apply open source in some critical areas, or you have to really think of it almost like you're shaping something out of clay, and it's just like 100% up to you what that looks like. So one of the areas that I've been thinking a lot about lately is genomics and synthetic biology. I think that there's a lot of really profound ways in which open source can be applied to genetic evolution and the tools in which we explore the space of possible genetic evolution.
Are you a fan of like CRISPR and genetic editing?
Absolutely. Massive fan.
Really?
Yes. I think a lot of that work should be democratized and much more open for all humans, and the tools and infrastructure really should be there. Another thing that's like somewhat adjacent to CRISPR is what I would say maybe even more, near term kind of impactful would be the transcription factors discovered by Shinji Yamanaka in Japan, which won him a Nobel Prize. And essentially what they do is they allow you to basically take what are called pluripotent cells, sort of like a stem cell, and then you sort of like modify things in a wet lab, and you then reintroduce it back, and it is perfectly aligned with your DNA, and you can go and you can solve some really significant issues in a very short period of time, where you don't actually have to like grow like a whole new human. That takes a long time, So I think Altos Lab, which is funded by Bezos and Yuri Milner, is doing a lot of like very proprietary work that should be much more open for society. So that's the kind of stuff I'm pretty interested in.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I saw you were the one posting about 23andMe.
Correct.
And that data set should be like almost open source.
Yeah.
Way.
What's really funny is days after that, one of the basically founding members of 23andMe, I'm not going to disclose who they are, contacted me and said they would like to work with me on making that happen. So kind of cool.
Is that in the works? Or?
I just revealed it here on your podcast, my friend. So I probably can't say anything further from
that's
on
awesome.
That, but yeah,
maybe a subnet soon to come for that. That'd be incredible. Open source depends on the community.
Right.
How do you foster that community?
Yeah, you have to solve a problem. A lot of people ask this question: I want my community to be bigger, and I want my community to be more vibrant, or whatever. Like, those are the wrong questions. Stop messing around. Solve a problem. Is it a real problem, A? Or is it a problem you're inventing because you want to like do some extractive bullshit? No. Solve a real problem. Is it a real problem? There's ways of really assessing that. Almost all the time, here's the test. Are you ready?
Let's hear it.
The test is, does it solve my problem? Do I actually care? Do I have some personal, visceral reaction to it? Like scratching my own itch kind of thing. That's a real problem. And it's like personal, or it's like interesting. And you're like, wow, that's really cool. Like, that's my own, pain I'm experiencing so I can best craft the solution. That is what people need to do. And if you do that and you put it out authentically, in a pure, authentic way, your community is going to be pure and your community is going to be authentic and the whole thing is going to be amazing. I'm telling you, this is the case with like literally every single vibrant, healthy, nourishing, growing, amazing community that I've seen created. Now, things get complicated and things get very complex, and certain levels of success, like all kinds of things happen because it's like really an ecosystem. Like sometimes you have toxic things happening alongside positive, amazing things, and it's all kind of mixed in, and it's like beautiful. You know, it's like really awesome to see. It's almost like nature. It's almost like, you know, is everyone perfect? No, there's a lot of like horrible people out there. There's a lot of horrible things going down. But like overall, we are a beautiful species. So just being optimistic about things, I think, is really important. But like, you know, you have to adapt and but I think solve the problem. And if it's authentic and pure and actually, and then what you realize, wait, actually the solution is super interesting to like, not just me personally, because I love the solution here. I made it and solved my problem, but it's also useful to like millions of other people. And then you're like, wow, guess, and how are they thinking? They're like, oh man, I was thinking about solving that problem. Someone else did. That's beautiful. I'm going to go and use their thing instead. Why am I going to waste my time building the whole thing? Someone else just did it. That's pretty cool. And then there's a whole flywheel. And then it's like, wow, that's community. That's how you build a great community. You can't fabricate. You can't fabricate community. That's not possible. You can give people the impression, okay. Almost all crypto communities are completely contrived and fake. They're fake. You know, here's one funny thing. I put a tweet out like, I think maybe a year ago or something. It was like a while ago. And I was like, serious question. Why is it that every crypto project, I go and look at their Twitter, they have 400,000 Twitter followers, and then I go to their website and I do a little bit of diligence and they have like 14 users. Like, what's going down? It's just a scam. It's just a big scam. And so few of these projects actually have real community where it's like, look, I solved my problem. You know what's a real community? Ethereum. That's a real community. You know what else has a real community? BitTensor. That's a real community. I am a part of that community. That's a real community. What else has a really big community? Amazing. Bitcoin. Of course. Now, it can get a little cringe and toxic sometimes, but it is like jumped the shark in terms of like the level of community that Bitcoin has. You have people who are like hardcore anti. Like now the guy who is the most hardcore anti just 6 years ago when you started trading, doing options trading, Michael Saylor was anti 6 years ago. He is the number one evangelist these days. He's the number one. No one comes close. It's Michael Saylor. It's his show. These days, it's his show. And everyone's like, good for you, Michael. That's awesome. You know, he presented to the board of Microsoft for 3 minutes the other day. That's pretty cool. Right?
Just three?
They give him just 3 minutes. Only 3 minutes. He put his video out on the internet and stuff, and there's like 80 slides, like squashed into 3 minutes. But it was good. I mean, it was dense. It was fast. It was a fast, you know, could have been better, but they gave him 3 minutes. I mean, like, no, Bitcoin just crossed 100K.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of optimism. Things are going to be volatile. People need to be ready for this. It's going to be really volatile. It's not going to be a straight line up. It's not going to keep going like this. Come on. It's going to be really choppy and really volatile. The people who will be rewarded the most will be the ones that do not panic and do not sell. You know, I mean, this is basic. I don't agree with everything that Warren Buffett puts out at all, but I would say, you know, there's a lot of wisdom from the Oracle of Omaha that we need to like really honor and respect. One is be greedy when others are fearful, you know, and be fearful when others are greedy. So I think a lot of people just it's like lost on them when things get really choppy.
Yeah. Volatility is for sure to come with BitTensor especially.
Yeah,
Because
for sure.
Jake said Q1, decal, it's coming. What are your thoughts on decal? Is that going to change things?
Decal is going to change things big time.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's going to be very optimistic and positive long term. I think near term it could be extremely volatile. So that's one of the things that I think people really need to factor in to the sort of the weather forecast on the near term horizon is probably choppy. Now, what I think is also true is if you zoom out 6 months, 9 months, a couple of years, 3, 4 years, great things take time. And I think if you zoom out a couple of years, there's going to be a really significant transition from today. The network is almost like an oligarchy, or it's very centralized. There's a lot of like very sort of self-obsessed, extractive players, and I think that those people will be washed out of the system pretty fast. There's a commit reveal, which I don't know how technical you want to get, but it basically implements a way of encrypting the weights and then only opening them at specific time intervals. And that's going to solve, I think, a large, weight copying has really been a sort of a disease almost. And I think it's going to mitigate that and pretty much solve that. I think the commit reveal code should be merged next week is what I'm hearing. I think DTAL will provide more mechanisms for mitigating weight copying, but I think also you're going to have new problems potentially, that emerge, right? So, when you start going up a threshold of complexity, new exploits and new challenges are going to emerge. So we have to be prepared for that, and I think it's going to happen. I don't know exactly what the shape of that's going to be, but we are very excited to launch a validator, and we'll be
OSS Capital.
It's actually sort of an extension of OSS Capital, where it's a separate entity, and we'll be sharing more details about it next week. But our approach, what I'll just say, I'll just kind of make some comments at a higher level before getting deeper into that. Our approach is really going to be very aligned with the way we've been serving and working for great up and coming open source founders of all the companies similar to the ones I mentioned. Cal.com, Hopscotch, W4 Games, obviously, Liquid AI, Plane, and Research Hub, and a bunch of companies where we find a collection, or it could be a single, but usually it's like 2 or 3 amazing founder, and we invest in them and we hold for the long term. One of the big implications I think of DTAL is going to be you're going to have a lot of short-termism, and you're going to have a lot of people that are wanting to trade really fast, in and out of these alpha token pools. And I think that's going to cause a lot of, it's going to cause a lot of volatility. I'll just leave it at that. So, but like for us, one of the metaphors that I sort of imagined, it's kind of interesting, but not really possible. But I always sort of think about it, which is when we invest in a startup, right? Just equity, and we're investing, and we have an equity stake, but we don't control the company. We're not running the company. We're buying 10 to 20% of the company, and in some cases a little more, in some cases a little bit less. And I would say, like, if private startups had a stock ticker, it would be 10 times more volatile than crypto. And I've always sort of imagined that in my head, because I was with one of my investors the other day, and I won't mention their name, and if they watch this, they know who they are. And they were like, "So JJ, they're like a mid-sized investor, one of ours, and they were like, JJ, do you do sort of like the checking monthly, quarterly, checking with your founders kind of thing? Is that what's keeping you busy?" And I was like, no. I showed them my signal, right? I talk to probably 15 to 20 of our founders on a daily basis, every single day. I wake up, they're kind of around the world, and I just text them. And it doesn't need to be a Zoom or a video thing, but like you just, talk to the founder and just kind of understand how they're doing as a human, what they're working on, what they're struggling with, what projects are they trying to unblock? Are they trying to hire someone? Are they raising capital in this moment? Are they trying to work on, a deal, a customer thing? Do they have an issue with like a product design issue or something technical? It could be something technical. Do they just want to chat? Or I really admire and respect, these founders. And, I personally grow from like talking to them and working with them. And so I have an incentive, just like intrinsically. I have an extrinsic incentive because I'm like their VC, but I also have this like intrinsic incentive, which is like, I think these people are awesome. And I'm like, wow, I get to like learn from them and talk to them and like actually maybe I can be helpful to them. That's amazing. That's like icing on the cake. So yeah, I mean, we will be very responsive and engaged at that level with the subnets that we support. And I think a lot of our portfolio companies will also be very excited about making their announcements. I'm not going to spill any beans, but we have a bunch of portfolio companies working on subnets, like ones that we've already been working with and have invested in the past and stuff. It's kind of a natural extension if you really think about it. It's not like like BitTensor is a record-keeping system for implementing a business model effectively as a sort of like game on a distributed ledger that rewards you in a token, and it actually encourages good behavior. And in my view, and again, I'm not, I may be deep down, but I try to be more politically correct, I guess. I don't really care too much about being politically correct, but I care more about like just speaking the truth. I think the optimal good behavior you could potentially do as a human is producing more open source, like, making open source for the world. And like in particular, open source that is actually really useful and like a valuable technology of some kind, so like, BitTensor literally rewards humans for being good, for producing open source. Like, that's amazing. Sign me up for that all day long, So pretty much every one of our companies, they have a business model. They have a sort of a sustainability, incentive mechanism, implemented as, licensing their software, or it's a software as a service, or they have an enterprise version or the pro version or the paid API or whatever. But the core thing is fully open source and you can do what you want with it. And there's a great deal of technology there that's essential and unlimited and super powerful, almost like a nuclear reactor. And then it's like, okay, great. Now you want to contain that nuclear reactor and put it in a phone or put it in a house or put it in a building. You got to pay for that. But guess what? The nuclear reactor is free, and it always will be, because otherwise, we're going to be in a stone age, and we're not going to actually, grow as a species. I really believe that. Like, the more open source there is in the world, the more abundance there is. The more abundance there is, the more freedom there is. And the more freedom there is, the more like amplification of our, uniqueness and energy in the universe. And I think that's the right way to go. But I think the more closed technology gets, the opposite happens. The opposite happens. And I think that's provable. I think that's totally provable. And so, yeah, that's why I do what I do.
And it's a new age of intelligence.
Yeah.
Do you think it's coming?
I think it's coming. Yeah, for sure.
OSS Capital has a bunch of companies in the portfolio, all open source. You said some are coming to BitTensor soon. What does the process look like of, I guess, not converting, but adapting what they're doing currently to a BitTensor model?
It's a very good question. It's a very, very good question. Each one is a little bit different. The ways in which you define sort of the logic for how you would create a subnet to produce something that would benefit that company, but also the customers of that company and the community of users that company serves, or humans in general, and could be very general purpose. What I would actually probably say it comes closest to is sort of the process that those companies went through when they created their open source project in the first place. So it's not trivial, but it's also not non-trivial. But it's kind of a different thing because you're not only kind of defining the ground rules of what the technology is going to be, but you're defining the ground rules in terms of the sort of the scaffolding that creates the shape of what you want it to be. Right? So not just what it is in that moment, but what you want it to be and how you measure and define that. And so it's almost like a new way of expressing things. Kind of like, imagine the difference between painting like acrylic oil, whatever the medium is for some particular scene, like still life, or, it's a hill with, some deer grazing on it or something. And then imagine the process of having an easel with your paintbrush and painting versus creating like a woodcut, lithographic kind of, print. When you're doing like, a lithograph, you basically have to like imagine literally the entire scene in the inverse and etch into a physical, surface of some kind. It could be like pear wood or, like stone, cutting and grading, the inverse of the thing in detail, fine detail. And then you basically create an ink, sort of like, blot, I guess, over the surface, and you take Japan paper and overlay it, and then peel it off, and then it's like there's the lithograph or the woodcut, right? And so again, same scene, same picture, but writing in BitTensor subnet is the lithograph. Just painting it on canvas, oil acrylic style is an open source company. But that metaphor is not great because there's issues with it. The main issue is that the lithograph is, the surface of the cut, whether it's like a stone or wood, is static. It's just like one static frame. And BitTensor subnets are continuously like evolving, right? And their incentive mechanisms are also continuously evolving. And the way in which miners compete on the subnet to produce the output of the commodity that is defined in the incentive mechanism is also continuously evolving. So it's very different. I think your question is excellent because it's sort of prompting me to write maybe a paper on this, or like a blog post or a blog series or something, or maybe like a Twitter thread. Twitter thread's lazy. I'll do like a proper blog. I'll do a proper blog on this. You have my commitment. I'll do a proper blog post on this, because there are several companies in our portfolio that are actually like doing it, and I'm helping them with it. And each one is different. So I'm trying to think of like how I would generalize. I have to think abstractly about how to do that. I'll work on it.
Abstracting away, I guess, in that process, I would say you can incentivize an action or an outcome.
Yes.
Would that be fair?
Both are almost necessary because you need to incentivize the action in order to produce the outcome. See what I'm saying? So subnet 4, inferencing, text generation, token generation, vision generation, audio generation, whatever. It's inferencing out some particular type of model that you want more efficiently. You're going to be measuring cost of token. That's a metric. You're going to be measuring that. So that's an outcome, but there's a market around the cost of these tokens, right? So like people are going to be like, oh, I know how much that costs. This subnet's paying me to solve this puzzle for bringing the cost down, like the loss function. Now that's very interesting. I'm going to go and do XYZ things. I'm going to take an action. I'm going to go do these things, get better GPUs, figure out the networking, like whatever. And that's going to put me higher up on the leaderboard, right? To earn the emissions coming off of that Mining is extremely profitable. Right now, mining is like,
Absolutely.
people do not understand. People do not understand how profitable mining is. And the bar is low. The bar is low. For people who have talent and skill coming out of some major AI lab, for example, you can mine on BitTensor and make 10 to $20 million a year in this token. Maybe even more. I think on the higher end, a lot of people are making 20, 30, $40 million a year. And they have 2 or 3 person teams, and they're not working 24/7. They're literally going and solving some puzzles every few days kind of thing. So the bar is low. The bar is really, really low. I don't expect it to remain low. I think it's going to get way more competitive. And I think you're going to see people come in with some serious, compute and brains, making things a lot harder over time. I think that's going to basically perpetually happen.
Miners are where the, I guess, adaptations happen for improving these actions and outcomes of producing intelligence. I look at it as a complex, adaptive system. That's what miners are. And the bar is extremely low, like you're saying.
Yeah, today.
Yeah.
As of today. It's a temporal thing.
And that's the point of BitTensor is if the incentive is there, something or someone will come and solve that problem.
Correct.
Well,
But you can stimulate it. It's like the necessary activation energy, right? There's a lot of things that are not getting done in the world because we only have an intrinsic incentive in place to do them. But imagine the things in the world that we could have if there were increasingly shifting and sort of dynamic, extrinsic, meaning a measurable currency, incentives for all of the great things that humans could be doing. That is worth quadrillions of dollars. People do not understand how big this is. That will be very, very big if it properly succeeds. It is worth at least an order of magnitude more than current world GDP. People do not understand the magnitude of this. It is quadrillions of dollars. It's not trillions of dollars. So at the point of a transition, even 20% there, to that scale, the dollar will no longer be the world's reserve currency. And that's going to be very chaotic. And I think that people really need to kind of appreciate this. And I'm not saying anything concrete about when that's going to happen at all, because I remain extremely optimistic about my country, and I love my country. But I think that is also something that will happen, sort of on the way there, like in the transition.
you're saying BitTensor is so profound because it's a framework that aligns selfish interests with the collective interests
Yes.
in a decentralized fashion
Yeah.
that anyone can participate.
Yes.
Wow. Quadrillions.
Yeah.
And you said it would be the reserve currency?
Well, I don't think that that's what I said. I think it really comes down to your measure and your reference frame. So again, you have to understand what I'm saying in this moment. When I say quadrillions of dollars now, like that means something because we have that to measure.
Yeah.
And all the things that have kind of come about through the usage of that kind of invention, that medium, that representation of value, which is the US dollar. I would say it's less about BitTensor being the reserve currency of, humanity. And I think more about it probably being the reserve currency of innovation or technology creation, or say capitalism, let's say. I think we can leave the currency to Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin can be the reserve currency. But I think Tao would be more of again, when you want to innovate, or you want to produce some technology, you want to produce some, basically think about it as like what's the difference between currencies and equities? I think BitTensor is all of equities and derivatives. And I think that Bitcoin is more of like all over a very large portion of currencies.
I think
By the way, also BitTensor also is all commodities too.
I would say it can encompass anything. Would you agree with that framing?
Yes, but you have to be careful with that. You have to be careful with that.
Anything you should incentivize.
Here's the reason you have to be careful with that.
Okay.
Because if it's too like all encompassing too soon, right? It's kind of like overeating. You don't want to do that. You know, you can taste all of the things in your life, but don't overeat. So I think it is structurally true, but I think BitTensor succeeds if we focus really, really narrowly first on AI. And if we really nail AI, and it's like, where are the opportunities to completely obliterate the benchmarks? Like, for example, Francois Chollet, the creator of Keras at Google, which is like a TensorFlow framework. And a lot of people use Keras. Keras is awesome. Keras is used in a lot of our companies. I would say he has this really interesting benchmark called the ARC Challenge, which does not reward for retrieval and memorization capability, but instead on very low sample size, reasoning. And I'm a really big fan of benchmarks like that. And I think we need to create them so that we don't let, I call him Scam Altcoin, but I think people call him Sam Altman. Scam Altcoin wants to convince everyone that, AGI is like right around the corner and we're all going to have UBI and just be able to drink, Mai Tais on the beach and maybe chill. And I think that that's pure evil. I think that it's pure, unadulterated evil. I do not subscribe. Not good. Instead, I think that we need to create the mechanisms for people to have a reason and a motivation and a driving infrastructure platform for technology innovation, open source production, abundance, freedom, and contribution to progress. That's what BitTensor is. And a lot of things that Sam represents are evil, capital E. I deeply believe that.
As someone who was self-described or is self-described as amoral, to call him evil or his actions evil.
I have morals, I guess. I don't know. I guess I do.
What would be your single biggest, I guess, point on this is why what he's doing is evil? Or what he stands for?
I think it's just it just is what it is.
Okay. There we go. I guess let's flip this back to subnets. What type of subnet are best suited for applications to be built on top of?
That's a really interesting question. I would say probably the inferencing ones for now, maybe even pre-training, but like more likely inferencing, because like if you have subnets that are doing like really, really cost efficient inferencing, outputs and APIs and stuff for society, like pretty much all the revenue in the AI and labs and products is a function of inferencing off of certain models that are like really good at, general purpose things or domain specific things or whatever, right? And so I think if BitTensor produced really state of the art inferencing APIs that first appeared on BitTensor that, did not first appear from centralized AI, but first appeared on decentralized AI as a sort of a platform. I think that's the right substrate for people to build applications on top of, because then you can go and say, like, look, I want to build like a consumer app, or I want to build a software company or whatever. And inferencing are the ones that you want to look at.
And that's a direct competitor to ChatGPT?
Yeah, I mean, not just ChatGPT, everything. Everything that's going to be infused with AI is going to require inferencing because you're going to be inferencing a model, right? So it's not just ChatGPT. It's like pretty much like it's like all of the models that are doing different things. You know, generating movies, video, generating audio, generating text, generating code, generating images. You know, generating chip designs, generating protein sequences or genetic modifications or, whatever. Like that's inferencing. You're inferencing some model. And if the tensor kind of produces these models that you could then expose to businesses in society, that's going to be the most interesting area in my opinion. But again, it's like extremely broad. Like people need to understand that there's going to be hundreds of inferencing subnets on BitTensor in the future. Right now, there's like, 5 or something, 5 or 6. So you could be doing the silly strategy and like allocate to all 5 or 6 of the inferencing subnets on BitTensor. There might be more than 5 or 6. There might be like 10. Depending on how you really define what different subnets do and stuff. I would say that's going to be the biggest area for applications. Yeah. Is the inferencing ones.
If you can inference anything or generate answers to anything, would you consider that AGI?
Okay. When you use the word anything, you need to specify that. Problem with those types of questions or the narrative or thought process that feeds into creating the thoughts that lead to asking that question, they are very flawed on many levels. The first level is very flawed on is when you postulate that we know what a human is capable of in a general purpose way. And then you say, actually, what if we got the AI to be able to do that at least baseline or like pretty good? That's AGI, right? And okay. Actually, I think I said this on the second interview that I did with Mark Jeffrey, which I think kind of bombed actually. I think the third one was good. I think the first one was like the great one. But I think I said this in the second interview. And I basically said, the best example that I can think of for an exceptional act by a human that most people don't really have the appreciation of or have ever heard of. And I would say less than 1%, some fraction of 1% of people that are alive even have heard of this is when Einstein published the theory of general relativity in 1915. Carl Schwarzschild had effectively solved, and he was like reading and studying for a bit, aware of Einstein's work. So it wasn't like totally from zero, but like maybe for a couple of years prior, but like not that long. He was sick with typhus on the front lines of the First World War. He solved the series of differential equations, which are the formulas that make up general relativity, GR. And he sent a letter to Einstein, and he was like, hey buddy, I solved your equations perfectly. And, it's basically the solution to the equations was just like basically a sphere, like a ball, which is, kind of boring, but also like extremely profound. And listen, I'm not explaining with as much like profundity as I should have, but what Carl solved for with perfect symmetry, weeks, if not, because it probably took weeks for the mail to get delivered, right? Probably days after reading Einstein's publication, is, in my opinion, the greatest feat of human intellect. Like, it's way up there. If not the number one, it's within the top 10 or something. And when we use this word AGI, it's so bad. A lot of the tech, movers and shakers and the AI companies are sort of like backing off of it now, including Sam. And Dario Amodei is like, that's the wrong term. And, you know, like, it is disrespectful and extremely hubristic to humans that we believe we know the bounds of human intellectual capability. It is really decel, shall we say, right? In the EAC narrative that we're in now. It is really decel to sort of assert that you know the bounds of human potential. That is the thing that really upsets me about this term AGI. And I think it's just a phrase invented to extract mountains of money from venture capitalists. That's why it was coined as a term. That's in my view, right? You know, kind of tongue in cheek. But I don't like the term at all.
You don't like the term because AGI cannot, or I guess AI, artificial intelligence, can't account for what is not yet known. If I'm understanding.
I think that's a way of putting it. That's a way of putting it. Like, I just think that it doesn't account for like incredibly, like almost indescribable feats of intellect that humans have accomplished already. And I think it also kind of shuts the door on the potential to sort of like continue expanding on the definition of what it actually means to be human. Because I think that we haven't even begun fully describing that. And so, yeah.
We wandered far from something.
Wandering's great, man.
Absolutely.
Wandering's great. Embrace the wandering. I love wandering.
When you invest in these open source companies,
Yep.
you say you accept, you allocate 50% to developing the open source product itself, and then 50% to the application or the community. I forgot the exact thing you had said. It was something along those lines. It's 50-50.
It's never really 50-50. I may have said that, but I think the context is important. I can't remember what the context was.
It was something along those lines.
I think the best open source companies that I've seen maintain a very significant percentage of their time and investment in purely open source innovation. And then some very significant, but not vast majority, probably the majority, but not necessarily the vast majority, in being really, really hardcore about competing and building an amazing product and serving customers. And by the way, guess what? You're not doing anything like wrong when you're charging money for something that's like extremely valuable for the world. That's great. And I am a capitalist, and I think capitalism is the most powerful force for human abundance and human productivity in the history of our species. Okay. So like BitTensor, by the way, is what I would call it is a capitalism blockchain. That's what I would call BitTensor. So effectively, that's what it is. So big fan, obviously, you know, we're here. And, but I think like, if you look at, the split, I think it's probably more along the lines of 60-40, 40% open source, 60%, you know, but it can ebb and flow too. Like in the very early days, it could be vast majority open source or almost 100% open source. And then, you know, you get to a point where it gradually comes down. But look, that's because the thing is so successful and you have this giant massive ecosystem. Like OTF is shrinking. You know, the foundation behind BitTensor is like getting smaller. People know this and see it. And that is an extremely healthy thing. That is a very healthy and productive thing because it increases the decentralization of the network. It delegates responsibility to trusted people in the community. As the community grows, those people over time will maybe delegate their teams out. You know, we're building a team. We're probably going to have, you know, over time, maybe a dozen or so people, maybe a couple dozen if we get like really big in the next couple of years. We don't need to build a big team. And, you know, kind of more like a SWAT team, like really, really
Special forces.
elite, like very high quality people that we know are going to be doing like phenomenal work. And I would say, you know, I don't necessarily think that those organizations need to be all centralized forever either. I think over time you can decentralize that out, but it takes time. Maybe decades, but it definitely takes time.
OTF is shrinking, and they are the main contributor to the communal aspects
Right.
of BitTensor.
Yeah.
How do you say OTF goes away? How do you incentivize contributions to those communal aspects?
For one thing, I will be bringing on. I'm not going to disclose any details yet, but we're going to be doing a lot of open source with our effort, and that's going to be very heavily in service of purely open source development for the underlying network and the code base, almost like a foundation, but basically just like supported by us. And that's extremely fundamental work, but it is purely open source oriented. The thing that people need to understand though is this is not like a selfish act. This is not like some, this is not unselfish, selfless act. It is actually selfish. It is actually selfish if you really think about it, because like we're going to be participating and competing in the games, but we're also going to be supporting some of the core foundational pieces. And I think that those are not going to be centralized in any one company. And we're going to have a handful of folks. There are going to be other folks that are independent, that are just not working for a company, that are just like developers out there. There's going to be a handful of people. And this is the case with Bitcoin. This is the case with pretty much every major project out there. But I think even with Bitcoin, there's like a handful of companies that employ a lot of the core maintainers. Ethereum has they have consensus. They've got a handful of companies that are, very heavily investing in the upstream open source EIPs and the whole like developer tool chain and stuff. So I think that that's kind of like a national thing, and that's going to happen. That's going to happen in a big way with BitTensor.
How do you balance the need for the decentralization and productization? How do you balance that? Because to develop a product, you have to centralize it away.
Yeah, correct. I mean, the products are not going to be developed by the underlying protocol. The protocol is the protocol. The protocol needs to just disappear into the background, almost like a mycelium, internet fabric covering the earth, right? Like that's, I think, what it really needs to look like. And that should not be controlled or owned by any one company. Far from it. There should be dozens or hundreds of companies that play a small role, or hundreds of thousands of people. And I would say the other thing to really understand is the products themselves are not getting built on BitTensor. They're getting built by the companies that benefit from the underlying commodities getting produced by the subnets, right? And so there's always going to be this like infrastructure platform kind of story around it.
There's a debate of it falls on the subnet owner or the validator. Who should be building
Both.
products?
Either or. It could be both. It could be one or the other. It depends on the situation. And I think the interplay between validators and subnets is also going to change and evolve a lot over time.
Do you think EVM will play a big role?
I think the EVM support's interesting. I mean, I think that you can do more expressive stuff with more complex kind of fintech DeFi sort of transactions that would otherwise be difficult to implement natively or directly on a subnet incentive mechanism or through some other thing. But I think like we just have to be careful. Like the reason the current implementation of the EVM palette is permissioned is we want to mitigate people from creating shitcoins basically on BitTensor. And there's going to be like a lot of these really risky vulnerabilities if we sort of deeply integrate the EVM support, which I don't think is happening. I think it's much more a matter of interoperability than it is a sort of a native integration. And so, I think Ethereum is actually a really useful system in a lot of contexts, and the Solidity toolchain that's supporting that on BitTensor is going to unlock some really interesting solutions. But I don't believe that there's going to be any universe where these alpha tokens on BitTensor, which are sort of a slice of tau, it's like sort of a synthetic representation of the overall tau supply. Those subnets are not going to have a native ERC20 token going and floating around on exchanges. Like, we will not support any teams that do that. And we will make it very clear that that is a credibility destroying move. And we will heavily focus on the teams that have a dedication to BitTensor.
What do you think are going to be the biggest challenges moving forward for BitTensor, subnets, growth, anything involved with the protocol?
I think that there's going to be challenges and struggles and growing pains in all those areas, and we're going to solve them all.
There you go. Okay. I'm gonna wrap it up with this. What advice do you have for people working in the open source or developing on BitTensor?
I think that the surface area for opportunities to contribute and make this thing better are immense. And people really need to jump in and learn about where the network has rough edges and how to jump in and really contribute. And I would say on the toolchain side, there's a lot of opportunities on the kind of the docs. There's a lot of opportunities. There's, think it's an open source project. Think of it like, where was Linux in the early 2000s? Where was the driver system? What were the docs like? Where were the package managers? The user space toolchain and all this kind of stuff. That's how I would look at it. There are so many areas for people to jump in and contribute that it's hard to really prioritize. I mean, let's say one thing would be almost like usability and security kind of features, but not necessarily in the open source BitTensor code base, but sort of like developer experience, developer kind of like workflow tools that simplify how you start a subnet after you get your registration fee. How do you, which I think that's going to come down a lot. By the way, I think DTAO and early into next year, we're going to see a lot of the registration costs for creating a new subnet come down massively. I think it's going to come down massively. So I would caution people, we have not done this, but I would caution early startups that are really eager to don't do these like really aggressive deals with a lot of the ecosystem players. Just don't do them. Like, walk away. I mean, wait until the registration fees come down. And we meet with teams on a very regular basis, very frequently. So I would say the other thing is, like, we will absolutely support teams that we think need to move now, and they're the absolute highest quality teams. And we're happy to pay the registration fee. And it's not like we're losing the tokens that are just getting locked up. And, some of that's going to change a little bit in detail, but that's kind of how we look at it. And I think another area for contribution is just really explaining, like, understanding exactly how BitTensor works, what it does, which is it's a distributed ledger record keeping system for writing what's called an incentive mechanism. That's basically, something like a loss function, but it like codifies the things that a developer needs to produce or solve for in order to earn, some reward coming into that subnet. And once you write that mechanism, and it's actually something that aligns with, we want to increase the rate of intelligence, production in the world through, basically beating a lot of benchmarks and making, the best models we can. That's very compelling. And so basically learning about how to explain that and make that better understood, especially as the world moves from this very extractive, centralized environment we've been in to one that I think is going to be really abundant for everyone, and, allowing this kind of like global participation in the process. Because right now there's like a handful, there's like a few companies, that are really doing this. And if you could get more of the best, most genuine, talented humans in society to like actually be part of that process and not be based in Silicon Valley or in, or in London, then I think that will create, a really awesome future.
Joseph, been a pleasure having you on.
Likewise, man. Thank you for having me.
And this has been awesome.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.